Hey, what's up guys? It's P-LASK here, also known as Paul Laski, Ableton Certified Trainer and Sonic Academy Guest Tutor. And today we're going to be taking a look at Ableton Live 10's Wavetable Synthesizer. Very in-depth look at Wavetable Synthesis and Wavetable Synthesizer from Ableton Live 10. So before we get going on this, I did want to spend a little bit of time just talking about the history of Wavetable Synthesis. I'm a sucker for history, and when I teach synthesis classes at the school that I work at, I often love to dive into this stuff with my students as well. So I will give some credit here to this excellent article on Ableton.com. It's one of their blog posts by, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, David Abravanel. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, but the article here is called The New Wave, an in-depth look at Live 10's Wavetable. And this article isn't so much a tutorial as it is a little bit of the background of the development of the Wavetable Synth for Live 10. So got to give credit to that article, which I read up in some of my research for this first video. But I want to start with this, sorry if this is a mildly eerie looking image of this guy named Wolfgang Palm, who's actually a really awesome guy. He is probably, we could consider him the father of wavetable synthesis, I think. He was a musician and technologist. Well, he's still with us today, so he is a musician and technologist. He founded the company Palm Products GmbH, which also abbreviated as PPG, which made one of the first hardware wavetable synthesizers called the Wave, which came out in, I believe, 1981. Here is an image of the Wave right here. So the PPG Wave, this is actually version 2.2, so there are a few different iterations of the Wave that came out throughout the early 80s. And what this is it's a hardware synthesizer, but the oscillators, the standard analog oscillators that you get in most other synthesizers, were replaced by basically digital sample players. So what a wavetable is it's a digitally recorded sample, but the difference between just a sample player, like something like the EMU emulator or something like that, or even Ableton Live's Simpler or Sampler, for example. The difference between this and that is that a wavetable synthesizer is just going to take single cycles of the waveforms, and there's different terminologies for these depending on the synth. Another wavetable synth I like to use a lot is X for Record Serum, in which they call these subtables. But basically, this digitally sampled waveform, each individual cycle of the oscillator, it's usually going to be different, so each cycle will be slightly different. So it's not just going to be like a sine wave that repeats constantly over and over again. And each single cycle or subtable can be isolated and looped. And the other thing with wavetable synthesis is that these single cycles can be morphed seamlessly between. And that's really the difference between sample-based instruments and something like a wavetable synthesizer. Another thing is you couldn't really load your own samples into this. It has a bunch of preset wavetables that you could pick from. And part of the magic of wavetable synthesis is the ability to evolve and morph the sound. So again, we're replacing the analog oscillators with wavetable, digital wavetables. Also different from samplers because we can't load our own samples into it and customize them. We're kind of stuck with the wavetables that are available to us. And we have the addition of optionally morphing between different cycles or different subtables of the wavetable to kind of create sounds that evolve and change over time and morph. So it's a very interesting type of synthesis. Now, the PPG, as I mentioned, it replaced the oscillators with wavetables, but it did use an analog filter. So you've got this nice kind of warm sound you'd get with with analog synthesizers when you're passing the oscillators through an analog filter. So it blended kind of the best of both worlds here, where we were getting into early digital synthesis techniques in the early 80s, and then still maintaining that analog feel of the filters and whatnot in the circuitry. So really, really nice sound out of this thing. If you want to look up some YouTube videos, just search PPG Wave. There's a ton of videos of people playing through the different wavetables and stuff. Moving forward into the early 90s, now I'm skipping a few here, but I'm just kind of touching on the big ones. But the Korg Wavestation came out, I think, in 1990. And this is another wavetable synthesizer, although when these hardware wavetable synths were coming out, they came up with all these cool marketing terms for them. So I think they called this one a vector synthesizer, or vector synthesis was the engine that it used. It's basically wavetable synthesis, though. This one is hugely popular. Again, if you want to look this up on YouTube, I'm sure you can find samples of people playing popular sounds with it. Really, really big in the early 90s. And then kind of an off-the-wall kind of under the radar one that I found in my research is the NSonique Fizmo, and this came out in the late 90s, and this was kind of near the end of the era for hardware wavetable synths, and that's not to say that there aren't still some out there today, but it's just that wavetable synthesis has become more and more popular in the digital realm of computers and plugins. But this one came out in, I believe, 1998. I love the color scheme on the faceplate of this thing. I kind of want to just buy one just to have in my studio because it looks so cool. But I did look up some videos of this too. Sounds amazing as well. And again, use this wavetable synthesis technique. But you can see if you look up here on the top panel, they called it Transwave, a Transwave synth. So they all have fun terms for them, but it's basically all the same sort of concept here. Is digitally sampled waveforms that are arranged into a table that we can kind of morph between and blend between seamlessly to change the harmonics of a sound. Now that's going to bring us to Ableton's Wavetable Synth down here. And in the next video, we'll kind of go over an overview of the whole interface. But I just want to show you really quickly, you've got two main oscillators here, and the default oscillator is basic shapes. Now, these are basically analog style subtractive synthesis waveforms. We see a sine wave. And if I use this slider here, I can blend between the different waveforms. I've got now a triangle wave, a saw wave, and a square wave. But you'll notice that I can move the wavetable position slider and kind of land somewhere in between. And what I have now is this hybrid waveform that has characteristics of the triangle wave and the saw wave. We can kind of hear what that sounds like. And I can also just hold a note down. And if I move through this, you'll hear this seamless blend between the different waveforms. So that's going to be the principle behind wavetable synthesis, is this ability to seamlessly blend between single cycles of waveforms that kind of morph into each other. And you can hear how I move the wavetable position slider here if I hold a note down again, how the harmonics of the sound change and the tone of the sound changes as we move through these different single cycles of these subtables. Cool? So now that we've got a little bit of background and we understand a little bit of the principle behind wavetable synthesis, let's move on and we will take a look at the interface of Ableton's very unique wavetable synthesizer.
Thanks everybody for watching, commenting, and indeed liking. We really do appreciate all the support we get here on our Sonic Academy YouTube channel. So if you found this video super useful, please, we'd love you to hit the subscribe button. We update the YouTube channel every week with new content. And if you want to watch some more relevant content, just click on the videos beside me.